If something doesn't draw you closer to Jesus, then what are you messing around with it for? So many people are like, what? Well, I want to go down and I want to follow this road doing this thing or that thing. And the question is, does that draw you closer to Jesus, or does it push you away from Jesus? When I talk to our leaders in our life groups, when I talk to our pastoral staff, I explain to them I use this term, and sometimes it freaks people out, my philosophy of ministry, or the lens through which I see ministry, and this is for our pastoral staff, but it's for anybody who's a follower of Jesus, it's really, really, really simple. It's not always easy, but it's not complicated. Our job in ministry is to take barriers away between people and Jesus. And the question is, are the things that you're doing, are they putting a barrier there, or are you taking a barrier away? The thing that makes me so frustrated with some other people out there who want to stand there and tell you that you're all going to hell is that they're actually pushing people away from God. Whether that's actually true or not is not helpful. The question is, are you drawing them to Jesus? Because you screaming at someone doesn't help. It actually makes my job harder. Knock it off. It's already hard. It makes all of our jobs harder because we're all called to draw people to Jesus. Now, that doesn't mean that you're like, well, do whatever. That's not it either. But your job is not the Holy Spirit's job. The Holy Spirit's job is to convict people of their sin. Your job is to draw them to Jesus. Your job is to share them who Jesus is. You let the Holy Spirit do the rest. You let God begin to change people's hearts. Who are the people that surround you? Do they draw you closer to Jesus, or do they pull you from him? Now, you probably, like myself as well, just because I'm a pastor of a church, I am out in the world as well. And I'm working alongside people that I'm like, they're not necessarily someone who's following Christ in their words and their actions. And I don't mean that are those people in your life, and are there people in your life that are following God? Yes, we probably have all of both. But my question is, who are the people that you allow to influence you? Are they drawing you closer to Jesus, or are they pushing you away from Jesus? Who are you going to allow to have a voice that influences your life? What do you watch on TV or your phone or your computer? Does it draw you closer to God, or does it pull you away from God? What music or podcasts do you listen to? Do they draw you closer to God, or do they pull you away from God? If it doesn't help you follow Christ, then lose the empty baggage. This is what Paul is trying to get at. Throw off anything that hinders you, anything, he's talking about a race, anything that slows you down. If you listen to our devotional and our YouVersion Bible app that we've been going through, I love that the guy that does it, he talks about people who are doing missionary planes, and they take planes and they strip them down to nothing so they can get as much cargo in them as possible to go out and fly in very remote areas. And they were taking medical aid and all these other things. There's no cushy seats. There's only hard seats. Why? Because the cushy seats weighed more. They took off anything that would hinder them and slow them down to maximize their ability to be effective. The same is true with an athlete, and that's why he uses this training example. They throw off everything that will hinder them. It is hard for me to resist those donuts out there. But it's easy oftentimes for an athlete who is in training because they are so focused on their goal. They recognize, although I will like it in the moment, it's going to make my job harder in the long run. So they stay disciplined because they're in training. I was a lifeguard for most of my years in college, and one of the things that I learned from many of the competitive guy swimmers as they would come in and they would train in the mornings was that they shave their bodies. They shave their chest, they shave their legs, they shave their armpits, they shave their arms, they shave their knuckles. And they said that the reason that they do that is because even the small body hairs create drag in the water, and they can affect their time. That's in microseconds. This is also true for some speedrunners. And I know it's weird, but you think about how detail-oriented and focused a swimmer is if he is shaving his forearms, because those little hairs can get in the way of his goal. This is the kind of detail that the preacher is talking about. With everything that hinders, And the sin that ever so small can easily entangle us. So get rid of it. Well, it's not that big of a deal, though. Is it? Then this is what Paul is, not Paul necessarily, but the preacher here. I keep saying Paul. I don't know who it is. This is what the preacher is getting at. Throw off everything that even slows you down, that hinders you from reaching what Jesus is calling you to. This is the beginning of his close of his sermon. He's like, guys, now that you understand who Jesus is and the whole goal of living in faith, would you just get rid of everything else? And for them, one of the biggest things he's trying to help them understand is the religiosity of the law. He's like, it's not for you anymore. Don't worry. Jesus fulfilled it. You don't have to worry about a sacrificial system. You don't have to worry about doing all of these things to please God. Jesus has fulfilled all of it. He did it for you because he cares about you. Focus on just Jesus. Verses 3-4 say this: consider him, he's talking about Jesus, who endured such opposition from sinful men, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. In your struggle against him, you have not yet resisted to the point of shedding blood. Man. He's still using an athlete's example, though. They train so hard, their knuckles bleed. They train so hard, they have calluses and blisters. They train so hard that they begin to shed blood. He's like, have you actually shed blood for your faith? Have you really trained that hard? And they're probably like, no. The preacher isn't playing around with his sermon. He said, you have not resisted to the point of shedding your blood. And he means this discipline to follow Jesus is a serious thing. So then he says, and you have forgotten that the word of encouragement that addresses you is sons. And he quotes Proverbs 3:11-12. He says this: my son, do not make light of the Lord's discipline, and do not lose heart when he rebukes you, because the Lord disciplines those he loves, and he punishes everyone he accepts as a son. Man, that just sounds rough. Well, let's keep going. Verse 7. Endure hardship as discipline. God is treating you as sons. For what son is not disciplined by his father? Well, I don't know. He didn't live in 2024, so a lot of them now. If you are not disciplined, and everyone undergoes discipline, then you are an illegitimate children and not true sons. Moreover, we have all had human fathers who disciplined us, and we respected them for it. How much more should we submit to the Father of our spirits and live? Our fathers disciplined us for a little while as they thought best, but God disciplines us for our good, that we may share in his holiness. No discipline seems pleasant at the time. Well, yeah, that's kind of a no-brainer. But painful, yeah. Later on, however, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by it. Therefore, strengthen your feeble arms and weak knees. Make level paths for your feet, so that the lame may not be disabled, but rather healed. When he talks about sons, he doesn't just mean boys, but just children. In general, this is sons and daughters. This is inclusive of all of the kids. But that is how the grammar works in Greek. When discussing kids, it's just a Greek thing or grammar thing. When you say in the plural, it doesn't just mean just sons. It means sons and daughters. It means children. Spanish does the same thing. When you talk about your kids, you say hijos, and it's like, it doesn't just mean sons. It means sons and daughters. But when the parent disciplines their kids, it's not about punishment as it is about discipline, about discipleship. It is about training our kids. When I was a teacher, I used to do trainings on classroom management. And some teachers think classroom management means you got to control the classroom. I'm like, no, classroom management means that you create an environment where learning is maximized. It doesn't mean that you tell your kids to sit down and shut up, especially if you're working with gang members in Eastern Washington who want to flip you the bird. And I'm like, guess what? Me trying to control 17-year-old gang members is not going to work like that. But when you engage with them, then you begin to manage your classroom, because you unlock their mind by unlocking their heart first. And you connect with them. I remember I had a student one time, and I asked everybody to pull out their assignment. We were going to go over it together. And this is, most of them are juniors, like Spanish 3 or something, or Spanish 2. And he was really frustrated and whatnot. And I said, hey, pull out our assignments. We're going to take a look at it. We're going to go over it together. Let's review. And I don't remember his name, but he stands up and I said, hey, get your assignment out. And he goes, F you. And he just like swore at me. And I was like, whoa, I was not ready for that. And I said, and the whole class just froze. And I go, why don't you wait outside for me in the hall? And everybody goes, ooh, teenagers. So he goes out in the hall and he's just red, fuming. He's just ready to fight. He's just so angry. So I let him sit out there for a minute, get the students going on their activity and stuff. I calm down also. I walk outside, and I'm in my 20s. I mean, I'm a young guy. I'm not much older than him, actually. And he's just out there, and I looked at him. I was just quiet for a second. He goes, you send me to the office? I go, no. So what's going on at home? And he breaks, and he just starts crying. He didn't do his assignment because his home life was an absolute mess. And I'm like, I don't care if you did the assignment today. The assignment's just a way to help you learn. I care that you're successful. That student was like the best student I ever had the rest of the year because I just saw a moment in his life. And I was loving to him. And that's also discipline. Because you're training someone for those moments. It doesn't mean you're just hard and always blowing the whistle at them, but it's also unlocking their heart. And those are those moments where parents, if we do it right, and we do it wrong a lot of times, and I have conversations with my own kids, I'm like, yep, I'm messing up as I figure it out. But there are moments where you say it's not just about getting your kids to do a thing, it's about helping your kids understand. And that's actually what training is about. You have intrinsic motivation. You see, extrinsic motivation means that it's from the exterior. You're being motivated because your teacher's going to give you a gold star or your teacher's going to punish you. That's extrinsic motivation. It's from the exterior. But intrinsic motivation is from the inside. It means I'm doing this because I want to do it. I'm doing this because I have my own goals, and that's pushing me. And let me tell you, that kind of motivation will beat the exterior motivation all day long because you get them to see the goal. They see it with you, whether that's in sports, that's in a classroom, or that's in your own personal life. It doesn't matter. When you get behind that and you recognize why that is, you will run towards it better than anybody else. And when you see Jesus for who Jesus really is and what he really did, and you finally get that unlocked in your heart, you will run towards him because you understand what he did for you and the weight of what it is. It's not because somebody up here is explaining it to you. It's because you finally understand and you have met Jesus for real and you are sold out. That is what I hope for everyone. I want my own children to know Jesus the way I know Jesus because it has radically transformed my entire life. I want my church to know Jesus the way that I've come to know Jesus because it has transformed lives like crazy. And when you know that, everything in your life changes. That's what he's talking about with discipline. Proverbs 22:6 says, start children off on the way they should go, and even when they are old, they will not turn from it. If we can get kids to understand the why and unlock their hearts and minds, they will run for it for their entire lives. God disciplines us for our own good because he loves us. Kids don't always get that at the time. They think we hate them sometimes because we're strict, or because we have boundaries, or because there are consequences. But what every parent knows is that we discipline them because we're trying to teach them. We're trying to send them off in the right direction because we love them. You see, the opposite of love is actually not hate. The opposite of love is indifference. It is the lack of caring. Indifference doesn't care, and if we didn't care, we wouldn't discipline. But because we want our children to grow, because we want them to be successful, because we want them to love God, because we want them to honor others, because we want them to be successful members of society, because we want them to be people of character, we train them and we started at home. We've gone through the last several years of a major portion of our society that has said the reason that people are struggling in life is because of societal issues and systemic problems. That's what they call that word systemic. It means the systems of society have broken down. And that theory has fallen apart over and over and over again. In the school system as well, I see it all the time. They say, well, there's systemic issues in the school. If we fixed every issue in the school, let me tell you something. We only see those students for a certain number of hours a day. What happens when they go home? What happens when they're somewhere else that's not either at home or at school? School can't solve your problems for you. The government can't solve problems for you because the government cannot give what it does not have. Thomas Sowell is an economist, a sociologist, a professor, an advisor. He's a veteran Marine, and he is one who was on the advisory committees for Presidents Ford and President Reagan, the Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. He's 94 years old. He's still around today. He has written and researched extensively over 45 books on this exact topic and hundreds of other publications. And he discusses families, and he argues it this way, saying that a strong family structure is a microorganism for a functioning society. In fact, the family can act as a barrier against excessive government intervention in people's lives, which is why movements that seek centralized government control target the family unit. It's like, wow, he's writing today. He wrote this a long time ago. This is also why children who are missing a parent often struggle with relationships in the future, because those inherent disciplines that happen in the home are absent. In fact, the absence is the soil of which gang culture will thrive. I worked with gang culture frequently. And I remember then later I got to become a trainer for teachers. I told my administrators, like, can you just give me my gang kids back? Because I don't like working with teachers. They think they know everything. There was this one teacher, I don't understand why you're in this class. I've been doing this for 20 years. I'm like, you've been doing it wrong for 20 years. That's why I was assigned to work with you. I'm like, I want my gang kids back. They're fun. They're more fun. The gang culture is so inherent, and the places in society it is the worst is typically where there is an absent father figure. Let me tell you something about men and boys. Boys learn to become men by the father figure or the man in their life. And if there is not a father figure in their life, they will seek one out from a grandfather, an uncle, an older brother, or they will go outside of the family structure to do that. And gang culture provides that structure. It is a negative structure. It is a toxic structure, but it is a structure nonetheless. It fills a void in their life. Putting positive male role models in boys' lives transforms them forever. That is why my grandfather and my dad were very much involved in Royal Rangers. The vast majority of the boys did not have a father figure in their life. And they got to them right before they hit that puberty age. That is one of the reasons that I am championing Trail Life as one of our ministries. It tells young boys not only how to become men, but men of God. It transforms them. Now, having a father figure in your life is a great thing, but it's also a great thing to have more than that. The family structure is huge. Why? Because that is where discipline happens. And I don't mean discipline in punishment. I mean discipline in formation, discipline in training. People talk about the government fixing America and all of our societal problems. And unfortunately, like I said earlier, the government doesn't have the skill set to do that. It takes a family to develop discipline, and the government can't give what it doesn't have. We need to restore families, and then when we put Christ at the center, that is where change actually begins. It's an institution that God established. He created the family unit. He relates to us in family metaphorical terms. That is why he's done that. And when we want to throw that off, it's to say, well, your system doesn't work, God. No, it actually does, and a society falls apart when it begins to reject that system. In their book, The Coddling of the American Mind, How Good Intentions and Bad Ideas Are Setting Up a Generation for Failure, that's quite a title, isn't it? It's a great book. Psychologist Jonathan Haidt and attorney Greg Lukianoff, I think is his name, explains that when we don't discipline our children because we fear that they are fragile, we set them up for failure later in life. We're seeing that today as the younger generations are entering the workforce, they didn't just have helicopter parents, they had lawnmower parents. And I didn't know what that was, I had to look it up. Have you ever heard of lawnmower parents? Helicopter parents hover over the kids all the time. Lawnmower parents go in front of their children and mow the way for them. Their lack of discipline, because they've never had to do it, is now hurting a generation. Instead, and these guys are not Christian authors, by the way. They're very secular authors. And they actually advocate to return to a biblical concept of discipline. They say that it's important. It makes us anti-fragile. We need the resistance to make us stronger, just like your muscles. They say we think of things as fragile, and they use in this book this idea of we think of kids sometimes like a teacup, and we don't want it to fall because it will break. It's fragile. And then they say there's another idea that kids are more like plastic cups. I mean, you can drop it, and it's resilient, and it won't break, but if you drop a plastic cup enough times, it'll eventually break. They say we need kids to be anti-fragile, like a muscle. When you exercise a muscle, it's painful. It has resistance. And that's actually what makes it grow. Now, you don't want to overdo it because then you will damage yourself. And I think about it, every Wednesday, I do leg day with my best friend. We go to the gym, we work out, and we call it coffee day because there's a Starbucks across the parking lot, and we don't want to do leg day. We want to go get coffee instead. And we go in, and we're like, I hate leg day, but you can't skip leg day. You can't skip leg day. And we're in the middle of it. We're doing our warm-ups. I'm like, I don't want to do this. It's 4:30. My alarm goes off. I don't want to get up, but I know that Andy is going to be in the front of my house because he's picking me up today, and he's going to be there waiting, and he's going to say, hey, I got up for this. You need to do it. We're doing leg day today. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I don't want to do leg day. It hurts so much. And 2 days later, I'm walking like this because it hurts. But then there's the rest of the moments of my life that I'm able to run up the stairs and run down the stairs, and I'm still more flexible than I was 5 years ago, and I'm able to do a whole lot more. Why? Because that resistance and that pain and that discipline pays off. And instead of working out your physical muscles, Paul, or the preacher here, is working out your spiritual muscles. He even uses the example when he says, strengthen your feeble arms and your weak knees in verse 12. Verses 14 through 17, he switches and he says, this discipline is going to help you to stay holy. He says this, make every effort to live in peace with all men and to be holy. Without holiness, no one will see the Lord. You may want to underline that in your Bible. Without holiness, no one will see the Lord. See to it that no one misses the grace of God and that no bitter root grows up to cause trouble and defile many. See that no one is sexually immoral or is godless like Esau, and he's making references to the Old Testament for them, who for a single meal sold his inheritance rights as the oldest son. Afterward, as you know, when he wanted to inherit his blessing, he was rejected. He could bring about no change of mind. Though he sought the blessing with tears. You see, Jacob tricked his younger brother Esau, and he was hungry, and so he said, hey, I'll tell you what, I'll make you a meal if you give me your birthright as the oldest son. And he gave it up. He lived for the moment rather than recognizing the long-term goal. There's no discipline. You see, holiness here literally means to be set apart, be different, be weird, live differently, live for God, not yourselves. I'll have conversations and our kids sometimes will be like, well, Dad, so-and-so, they let them do this. And I'm like, we're not that family. In the Campbell household, here's how we do things. And that may be different than everybody else. That may make us weird. Okay, we're weird. I don't care. You get to a certain age as well as you just stop caring what other people think about you. Yeah, everybody with gray hair started saying amen. It's just for those of you guys who are really young and you care what people think about you, let me just tell you, it is such a freeing moment in your life. You're just like, I don't care. My son today, he's like, Dad, you wearing that today? I'm like, yep, I'm wearing that today. I actually do care. I'm not trying to be less of it, but it's part of the sermon, right? It is about discipline, about training, and so I dressed up to do some training. But when you stop caring what others think about you and you're worried about what God thinks about you, and I don't mean that in an arbitrary way where you're just haphazard, I don't care what anybody thinks. That's not what I'm saying. But you're more focused on what God thinks about you. You are different. You are set apart. And in those moments, God begins to work through you because your focus is not on what everybody else thinks. Because you have separated yourself from what everybody else thinks, you're worried about what he thinks. And that is a very powerful place to be. So he explains what it looks like. And he does this, it's called a juxtaposition. Can you guys say juxtaposition? That's a fancy literary term. It means that you put two things side by side to compare and contrast them. And he does an example of two mountains. The first one is Mount Sinai. So in verses 18 through 20, 21, he says, "You have not come to a mountain that can be touched, and that is burning with fire, to darkness, gloom, and storm, to a trumpet blast, or to such a voice speaking words that those who hear it begged that no further word be spoken to them, because they could not, it must be stoned. The sight was so terrifying that Moses said, 'I am trembling with fear.'" Now he doesn't name it, but to everyone in here, in that audience hearing that sermon, they know he's talking about Mount Sinai. This is the mountain where God came down, literally burned the top of the mountain, and the presence of God came there, and God spoke to Moses face to face, and he twice actually wrote out the 10 Commandments because Moses threw the first set down. This is the moment where the law was given. The mountain the preacher is describing is etched into the mind of the Hebrew audience. Mount Sinai is where the Hebrews stopped after crossing the Red Sea out of Egypt. They were tired and hungry, and Moses went to the top of the mountain, and smoke, fire, lightning all came down, and the mountain was a holy place. And the command not to touch it was straight out of Exodus chapter 19. No one, not even an animal, can touch this mountain. This is holy ground. But the preacher said, we no longer live under the law of the old covenant. So he moves to a different mountain, and he compares these two mountains. And so he moves from, this is what it was like, terrifying and difficult, and a law that was strict. But we don't live under that anymore. We live on a different mountain. We live on Mount Zion. Mount Zion is the mound on which the city of Jerusalem sits even today. And he says this in verse 22, "But you have come to Mount Zion, to the heavenly Jerusalem, the city of the living God. You have come to thousands upon thousands of angels in joyful assembly, to the church of the firstborn, whose names are written in heaven. You have come to God, the judge of all men, to the spirits of righteousness, men made perfect, to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, and to the sprinkled blood that speaks a better word than the blood of Abel." You see, Mount Zion, where Jerusalem sits today, is mentioned by the preacher on purpose to compare it to the old covenant of Mount Sinai. Mount Zion represents joy rather than the fear that Sinai represents. It represents grace rather than judgment. Zion is where we draw near rather than Sinai, where people had to stay away. And the reason for all of this is Jesus, our mediator. He's the one that now allows us access to God. He brings it down to just Jesus. So what do we do with all of this? How is it that the preacher ends this final thought? With worship. Worship is the proper response. So that's what we'll do today. When we recognize that it's not easy, but when we train for it, we can focus on just Jesus because we have done the hard thing. We have done the difficult thing. We did leg day. We didn't skip it. We have separated ourselves from everybody else. I notice that I'm really weird because let me tell you something. When I go to the gym at 5 a.m. on Sunday, I'm the only one there. It's my gym on Sundays. No one wants to go to the gym at 5 a.m. on Sunday, but I work on Sunday, so I need to get ahead of things. I don't want to go to the gym at 5 a.m. on Sunday. But you do the hard thing You do the weird thing. You do the holy thing, and you separate yourself from the way the rest of the world works. You do the disciplined thing. And you focus in a spiritual manner on Jesus. Because he is the author. He is the one who is the mediator. He is the one who has paved the way. And so we focus on him and not on ourselves. And that's a weird thing today. That was a weird thing then. It's easy to want to focus on yourself, but we focus on just Jesus. So he ends this way. Verse 25, see to it that you do not refuse him who speaks. If they did not escape when they refused him, who warned them on earth, how much less will we, if we turn away from him who warns us from heaven? At the time his voice shook the earth, but now he has promised, once more I will shake not only the earth but also the heavens. The words once more indicate the removing of what can be shaken, that is, created things, so that what cannot be shaken may remain. Therefore, since we're receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken, let us be thankful and so worship God acceptably with reverence and awe, for God is an all-consuming fire. We sang the song, Our God is an awesome God. It doesn't mean he's cool. It means he is full of awe and wonder. And he asks us to do the hard thing. But he didn't ask us to do the hardest thing. He did that. He fulfilled the law for us. He did the hardest thing. He just wants us to draw close to him now. And that's the weird thing. That's the different thing. That's the separate thing. And he's saying, can you just throw off the little things even, the things that are going to slow you down? Because it's just going to be a distraction. It's just a waste of time. We have conversations in our family of things that we do in our family and things that we don't do in our family. And it doesn't mean we're perfect at it. We're just trying to figure it out. But there are things in our family that are non-negotiables that we just don't do. Why? It doesn't help me get closer to Jesus. So it's hard. It's a discipline thing. It means I say no to certain things. It means I say no to being around certain people because I'm not going to let them be an influence in my life. It doesn't mean I will never talk to other people. I just don't allow them to have an influence in my life. Why? Because I want to be different. I want to be holy. I want to be set apart. I want to be focused on just Jesus. That's my goal. My goal is not focused on this world. My goal is focused on heaven. And while I'm here, I want to help as many people learn about heaven as possible. Because I'm just here for a short amount of time. My home was not Bolivia. My home is not America. My home is heaven. And Jesus, he said, hey, go make disciples. Help people follow me. Go preach the gospel. Tell them the good news. Tell people about me. Because I love those people. I created those people and I gave them a choice. Let them know about me. I want them to choose me, but I give them a choice. Because we have eternity to spend together. So that's what I focus on. If Jesus is our only way, then we need the discipline to follow him. So we have to get rid of everything, even the small things that distract us from Jesus. That paves the way for us to worship the one who made a way for you and me. So let's give him thanks. I'd like to close this way. It's a little different. I'm wearing workout clothes on Sunday. I'm a little different. So that's okay. You got a weird pastor. But I want to do something a little different. I want us to focus on just Jesus as we close this sermon. So worship team is going to come up. We're going to do one closing song, and I'm going to ask you guys to do the same thing. I want you guys to stand up, and I want you to come this way. And I want us to worship from here corporately. We live in an individualistic society. It's all about me, 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 me. That language is not so common in the Bible. It's actually about us, 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 us. And when it says you, it's actually a plural you, like a y'all, you guys. And God actually loves to interact with his people corporately. Sunday mornings are for the corporate the reading of God's word and the corporate worship. So I want to close in worship together. So I'm going to ask everybody to stand up. Don't make me get the whistle. I want you to come forward, and we're going to close in worship, and I want to worship with everybody together. It's a little different. It's a little weird. It requires a little discipline. But let's do the weird thing. Let's come forward. Let's spend time together, side by somebody maybe you don't even sit with that often. And we're going to spend some time worshiping Jesus. And as we do, I want you to have a conversation with him. Come on, get all the way up here. I know it's different. And I want you to ask him this: God, will you help me to be disciplined? To throw off any distraction that puts any barriers between me and you. Even the little things like those weird swimmers who shave their arms and their armpits and their legs, because those little things can slow them down. I'm not saying you have to shave your arms, okay? What I am saying is that you need to be able to say, God, what is getting in the way? As we worship, ask him that question and then let him speak to you. I want to be closer to you, Jesus. Help me throw off everything that hinders me from you.